Good afternoon and welcome everybody. I see that quite a few people are coming on now, so I'll do a rolling welcome as the numbers go up. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for this, the first open session of our webinar series. My name is Josh Ogada. I'm the Secretariat Lead for the Africa-Led Partnership based in Cape Town, South Africa. And I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you all and to thank you for joining us. We understand that we are in extraordinary times and virtual meetings are the only way to go at the moment. I'm sure most of you are probably sitting at home, so we appreciate you using the connections that you have to join us for this second session. We are looking forward to an interesting session this afternoon with a couple of speakers who have been we are very grateful to for having taken the time to join us. Just to start off quickly, because I know not everybody joining this particular webinar is a member of the Africa-Led Partnership or the Africa Mini-Grids Community of Practice. I will do a very, very quick intro of that before I hand over to Alexia, who's going to be running the session. Next slide, please, Karen. Just a very quick, a very short notes on the Africa-Led Partnership. The Africa-Led Partnership is the regional partnership of the LEDS Global Partnership, and the mission we have is to promote low carbon emissions, climate resilient development in support of poverty alleviation, job creation, and environmental management in Africa. We are an open partnership, open to membership from private sector, public sector, academia from around the continent, and open to everybody to join. At the moment, we have about 700 members from about 33 countries across the continent, and we are always looking for ways to bring in more people and get more country representation. Our objectives are to promote information exchange and coordination among LEDS programs, different country institutions, and anybody else who's involved in undertaking and supporting low emissions development strategies in the countries and in their regions. We also try to cultivate and support LEDS champions through our membership by providing capacity building, peer-to-peer exchange, and knowledge support across the continent. And of course, enhancing capacity for LEDS design and implementation through in Africa. Next slide, please. In terms of our structure, we have two co-chairs, Dr. Alan Kouadio, who works with the Ministry of Environment in Cote d'Ivoire. Sorry, there's a mistake on the slide. Our second co-chair is Dr. George Wamukoya, who's an AGN, who runs the AGN expert support based in Kenya. And of course, as I mentioned, the Secretariat for the Africa-Led Partnership sits with SouthSouthNorth here in South Africa. Next slide, please. In terms of focus areas that we have for the Africa-Led Partnership, obviously, like I mentioned, is strengthening our membership and fostering engagement between the different members, member countries in the regions. Building regional partnerships is very important to us because we understand that in the LED sphere, the regional partnerships and collaborations are what get things going. Obviously, we work through this community of practice, the Africa Mini-Grids community of practice. We also have an Afolu community of practice, and we also focus on mobilizing investment in NDC implementation. So NDC implementation is one of those that thread that runs through a lot of our work within the AFLP. And we also work very hard with our members to mobilize resources with different partners bilaterally and multilaterally to ensure that our activities in regions and countries are supported. Yeah, next slide. So at this, with that brief introduction, I would like to switch over to Alexia, who's going to be running this session. Alexia, are you able to share your screen?
I am. Good morning, everyone. Can you both see and hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. Great. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, as the case may be. I know we have folks dialing in from all over the place. It's wonderful to see you all here, and we look forward to having hearing from our panelists as well as engaging in discussion around the important topic of making energy access through mini grids affordable and accessible. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, Alexia.
And my slides. Okay, yeah. Perfect. I am Alexia Kelly. I'm the co-chair of the Finance Working Group and the principal at Electric Capital Management. We're a boutique climate finance and advisory service located in the United States, but we do quite a bit of work in Africa around energy access and finance mobilization for energy access. We're delighted to join you here today for this important conversation. And just a few words about the LEDS GP Finance Working Group for those of you who don't know us or the LEDS GP. The Low Emissions Development Strategies Global Partnership has been a partnership of developing country governments and implementing institutions who have worked together for more than a decade to advance low emission development globally, primarily through peer learning and collaboration. So we bring together developing country governments, practitioners, implementers, nonprofit organizations, and the private sector to really engage deeply on core topics related to low emissions development. We work with a number of developing country governments in Africa, as Josh noted, through the Africa Mini Grid Community of Practice, looking at finance mobilization for mini grids and energy access. But we also do quite a bit of work around green bond mobilization and other types of innovative climate finance globally, as well as capacity building work with developing country governments and other government entities around the role of climate finance in advancing our shared climate change objectives. So today we're going to be covering a variety of topics related to how do we get where we need to be with respect to financing for mini grids globally, but particularly across Africa. So we're going to look at what is the current state of play on mini grid climate finance currently. We're going to provide some information and background around the mini grid funding sources in Africa resource that we've developed at the request of the Africa Mini Grid Community of Practice membership. And we're very fortunate to be joined today by Geoff Sinclair, who's the Managing Director of the Renewable Energy Performance Platform. And I'm just going to introduce both of our speakers currently so that we can just hand over seamlessly when it's their turn to speak. But the Renewable Energy Performance Platform, I think, has been a real beacon in the energy access finance landscape and has provided really appropriate and accessible financial resources for small-scale renewables and mini-grids across Africa. So we're very lucky to be joined by them today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Geoff's perspective on where we are on scaling investment in mini-grids and small-scale distributed renewable energy in Africa. For those of you who don't know, the Renewable Energy Performance Platform is a £150 million fund that is investing in the development of small-scale on and off-grid renewable energy across sub-Saharan Africa. Geoff set up the Renewable Energy Performance Platform at Camco, where he is a managing director. And prior to joining Camco, he worked at Standard Bank as their head of climate finance, so has really long and deep experience working in and around the issue of climate finance and investment in emerging markets. We're also very fortunate to be joined here today by Mr. Alexander Obiechina, who is the founder and CEO of ACOB Lighting Tech, which is a Nigerian renewable energy company focused on mini-grid electrification and street light infrastructure. The organization has successfully accessed a combination of debt, grant, and convertible note funding. And Alex is going to talk to you today about his experience really growing a small-scale renewable energy and microgrid company in Nigeria, which of course is one of the most rapidly growing areas in this space. So working through the agenda, after we provide our initial presentations, we're hoping to have some time for Q&A and additional discussion. But we're going to move right into the topic at hand, which is really where are we with respect to mobilizing financial flows for energy access. So as you all know, nearly 1 billion people worldwide still lack access to electricity. We have made some substantial progress on that front over the last few years, but there is still a long way to go, and much of that population resides in sub-Saharan Africa. So mobilizing international financial flows globally in support of clean and renewable energy really needs to scale up. We're at about $18 billion in 2016, but we need to increase those flows substantially to about $120 billion a year through 2040. And Africa, of course, in 2030 is projected to still have a really significant unelectrified population, which of course is not in keeping with SDG 7, clean and reliable access for all, and it is obviously not a solution for meeting the country's economic development and social development objectives in the long term. So the conversation we've been having is really about how do we mobilize that finance and what does it look like? As a little bit of background, and since we have a lot of folks on the phone who may not be intimately familiar with specific terms, and we're going to dig in on different types of capital this morning. And so I wanted to just provide a quick overview of some of the key terms, what they mean and why they're important as we're having a conversation around finance mobilization. And for those of you for whom this is remedial, please accept my apologies, but we find that it's helpful to do a little bit of level setting at the beginning of these finance conversations. So the key and one of the most important fundamental differences in capital markets is the difference between debt and equity. So debt, of course, is capital that is borrowed for specific purposes and is paid back at an agreed rate over a fixed period of time. And it can be issued at the corporate or the project level, and I'll talk more about what that means in just a minute. Debt is typically considered non-dilutive because it doesn't offer an ownership share in the company necessarily, and it's considered lower risk and usually is usually only available to companies once you're cash flow positive or profitable. So if someone's going to lend you money, they want some sort of reasonable assurance that you're going to be able to pay them back, which requires cash flow and sufficient operating cash that you can make that happen. Equity, on the other hand, is capital that's invested under agreed terms at the corporate or project level. And it's typically invested in exchange for an ownership share of a company or project and tends to be considered higher risk, but also higher potential reward. And it's generally used to finance earlier stage, higher risk investments. So we are working through, it's important to note that across these different these different modes of capital, there are an infinite number and type of combinations. So there's all sorts of different instruments and approaches and deployment strategies that we use along that spectrum from debt to equity to meet specific financing needs on the ground. But this is a key topic to really understand well. The second is the difference between corporate and project finance. So corporate finance is typically invested at the company level. It uses both debt and equity and is used for growth, productive development, marketing, personnel, equipment purchases, et cetera. So it's really the funding that you use to grow your company at the corporate level as it gets larger. Project capital is invested, as you might expect, at the project level or at the project group level. So sometimes they'll put together special purpose vehicles where you can put groups of projects in one place and invest in the projects itself. So you aren't necessarily taking a position or investing in the business, but you are investing in the project. And that's an important distinction as well when we start thinking about the different types of finance that's available. Project finance can be both debt and equity, and as I noted earlier, that sort of infinite variety in the middle. And can also be used to address specific costs associated with developing projects. So early stage project development, equipment purchasing, land acquisition, operations and maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. So building on that, it's important to understand kind of where we are from a business development perspective across Africa. And it looks like, I hope this looks okay. It looks a little funny on my screen, but the important point to take away from this is that the microgrid business and the mini grid business landscape in Africa is still very early stage and what is considered relatively higher risk. So as we're thinking about the different types of capital, the different flavors of capital, and the different sources of capital, we really need to keep in mind that from traditional capital markets perspectives, mini grids, despite being infrastructure investments, are often viewed as a high-risk investment opportunity, both because of where they're located, but also because there are a number of early stage players and there is not a broad and well-established sort of set of business practices as a sector as a whole. And that ends up mattering a lot as we as donors and other members of the international development community are thinking about where is the right place to intervene. So there is no one-size-fits-all approach to financing, particularly not for mini grids. And successful both corporate and project development require access to capital in a variety of different contexts and in a variety of different flavors. So you need that early stage, higher risk, smaller dollar capital that you're seeing at the bottom left of the graph. But you also need access to growth capital, and you need access to larger amounts of more affordable capital down the road. So having an ecosystem of both funders and types of capital in every market is a really central part of ensuring that we're able to scale up capital flows to the levels that are necessary in order to really grow this market significantly. And I would say that this is particularly challenging in markets like Africa because mature and well-developed kind of early stage investment ecosystems in particular, like those that Europe and the United States have, don't exist in the same way in most parts of the continent, which means that accessing capital when you need it is particularly difficult. There's also obviously a heavy reliance on grant capital, and so really making sure that we have a good sense of what all of those pieces are and are working towards that is an important part of scaling financial flows. The types of financial institutions, so part of what we've just completed is an exercise where we have reviewed, and I'm going to, in just a minute, try and navigate to this resource so that you can see it. But we've just reviewed and begun to kind of collate the different types and sources of financing that are available for mini grids across Africa, and also some information and links to them. So one of the things that we've heard consistently from our members is that they have difficulty accessing capital when they need it, and they're not sure who to go to. Similarly, we hear from, I'm just going to try and share here, see if I can talk and chew gum at the same time. Can you guys see this now? No. 1 second. Did that work?
No, yes.
Yep, you can see it.
Yes.
Great. So you can see that there are a lot of different types of, thanks Josh, you can see that there are a lot of different types of sources of finance that are active in Africa. And we've put together a little glossary and a listing of what those types are. And then have also listed out the links to the various types of financing resources that are available there. So there's a wide variety of sizes of investment that are available, the key contacts, the regions that they focus on, and we've tried to just start to compile those in one place for you so that as you're thinking about resources and support for whether you're a private sector company or a government who is looking to scale investment, this is not a comprehensive, but a fairly thorough scan of the landscape of funders, both philanthropic and foundations, as well as multilateral development banks and private equity funds that are active and interested in investing and mobilizing resources in support of energy access globally. So those resources, that resource is available on the Electric Capital Management website and also on the LEDS GP Africa LEDS Partnership website, and we'll make sure that link is available So with that, I am very pleased to introduce you to our next panelist. And I'm actually going to stop sharing so that I can hand it over to Geoff, or excuse me, to Alex to provide a little bit of a private sector perspective on how things are going in Nigeria and some of your experiences accessing capital and really understanding how we can support developing country entrepreneurs in mobilizing resources more effectively. So Alex, over to you.
Thank you very much.
Alexander, I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to splice in very quickly there with just a bit of housekeeping. Just a reminder that if you have any questions for our panelists as we go along, please post them in the Q&A section, and the panelists will look at them and hopefully will answer them once we've gone through the presentations. And yes, the material will be shared afterwards. That's a question that was asked earlier on. So please feel free to post in questions and comments, and our panelists will deal with them, or we'll make sure that they're covered as the session goes along. Thank you very much. Please go ahead, Alexander.
Okay, thank you very much. Alexia, George, Josh, and the rest of the team. I think I'm very honored to be on this program. It's been a wonderful one. My perspective as a developer is not far different from what we have from other developers here in Nigeria. So we are in the mini-grid space as well as the street lighting infrastructure. We've been in the market for about 4 to 5 years now. So we are specialized in providing energy access to underserved and unserved area through using a mix of technology of hybrid, isolated, and interconnected solar mini-grid systems. So financing has been very key towards accelerating projects, and I can tell you it's been one pain in the ass of a lot of developers, not only in Nigeria, but I can say to a large extent in Africa and other parts of the world, but it's what's hit here in Africa. So I'll give two perspectives to it. I'll give a perspective of what is actually the current situation, what used to be the norm, where we are, where actually are we going. So we are in an industry where, as you said, Alexia, in your opening address, that the mini-grid space is indeed a very new space that portends a lot of challenge in terms of access to finance. From investors' areas, there has been questions in terms of investors' confidence as regards payback and return on investments coming back at the exact stipulated times that they're looking. So I'll give a rundown based on the few points that I've been able to pen down from a local developer's perspective in Nigeria, based on the business that we do and what we experience in the market. So we've been faced with a situation where before now, funding to a large extent, and which is actually the norm, a lot for you to scale in project to a large extent, a lot of people look at commercial lending fundings, you know. The commercial lending rates to a large extent is a bit alarming. So as you know, the norm before now is we have between 20 to 25, as much as even 28% for commercial lending rates. So you would agree with me, for a developer who is looking at providing energy access to rural communities, it will be very difficult when you put all that, put on the cost of infrastructure and the years of breaking even. I mean, you cannot compete favorably in the market. So before now, even the fundings to a large extent has been collateralized. What is actually on the ground? What is actually on the ground is a blend of debt funding, grant funding to a large extent, and equity funding. Can we say that grant funding is sufficient to do this job and the scale of pipelines that we have to electrify over 60% of Nigerians that don't have stable access to electricity? I don't think that is sufficient. The debt funding, do we really have it? I think that the funding is there, but the problem has actually been over the years benchmarking the renewable energy sector with other sectors. So why would an investor typically want to bring in funding in a renewable energy space that will take him 6 to 7, 8 years to get his return on investment rather than putting it in an oil and gas that will give him a return on investment in 2 to 3 years. So we've been faced with those challenges, you know, to try. But very recently, I think there's been a much of a shift in the narrative where we've seen partners in terms of saying in reality terms, local partners and local commercial banks that are actually standing up to the tide to say, can we truly pick up the business model and run through it? Can we truly run a structured finance in such a way that we see, we give a narrative or something that has never been in the line? And I would say very recently, we've been working very closely with REA. We've been able to partner with a local commercial bank, First City Monument Bank in Nigeria, where we were able to assess a local commercial debt funding. And one of the things we say to the financial institutions is, do not treat the funding requirements needed to rapidly scale the energy access gap as you would naturally treat other sectors, because the energy space is a space that is coming up. So for us to do that, we need a whole lot of de-risking instruments on the facilities that are coming in for these pipelines of projects. And through those de-risking instruments, to a large extent, I even think this is how these commercial banks can be able to come down in terms of their interest loan, in terms of conditionalities that they're setting, because it will be very alarming to you. For you to pick facilities, you are being told to bring all sorts of property that are double or triple time the value of the amount you really want to take. So as a developer, it's really funny. You cannot work. Working capital is also a very, very cumbersome thing. A lot of people don't take cognizance into working capital. So working capital, to a large extent, is actually a very good. And what do we need? In the current time, I think what we need in our space to be able to rapidly meet up the SDG goals in terms of universal access to energy is looking at a bridge capital to be able to assess some special intervention projects that we have. As you are aware, very recently, the World Bank has attracted about $350 million to the Nigerian electrification project. The GIZ, the European Union through the GIZ is also doing fantastically very well, pulling in over 36 million euros to accelerate energy access in Nigeria. All this cannot actually be achieved if we do not have some form of bridge financing to meet up that. And how do we meet up that bridge financing? Bridge financings that are single digits, short term, to enable developers deploy, get back the return on investment and pay back. So in synopsis, I think I want to believe that with the right, the capacities there in terms of deploying these technologies, but having the right mix of this funding to put it in place and in perspective to truly get down to the real developers who need this funding, I think it will go a long way to help us scale and achieve the universal target towards accelerating access to energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. That was, I think, a perfect illustration of some of the challenges that developers are facing on the ground, but also just underscores the importance of having that ecosystem of financing available throughout the development chain. We had a couple of clarifying questions that came in during your talk. And so one of them from Mahu from Ghana, he says, I keep hearing 60% of Nigerians to be electrified. Can you be more specific on the exact percentage of the Nigerian population that can be electrified through mini grids? So I don't know, Alex, if you have that information available or if there are other folks on the line who might as well.
Sorry, I didn't get the question properly.
He's just asking roughly what percent, if we know roughly what percentage of the population will be electrified through mini grids in Nigeria.
So based on the REA data, which we have very much available, so the focus is actually on looking at a mix of the underserved and unserved. So as you know, the underserved are people who possibly have grid connected electricity, but over the years, in terms of supply of energy access has not been sustainable. So in a whole, I think the statistics revealed close to 100 million, and that is well over 50% to be precise. And these are the data that are actually reflective from a very wild survey carried out by the Rural Electrification Agency. As you know, they're doing a lot of fantastic job towards ensuring that the energy access gap in Nigeria is breached.
Great, thank you, Alex. And Seth, to your second question, which is just information on the scale of funding required for mini grids. I know that there has been a number of analyses commissioned on this from a variety of different donors, and Geoff might actually speak a little bit to that in his presentation. But we can point you to some resources that have been developed. I would say that it's a wide range of estimates depending on who you talk to and which country you're looking at. So there's a lot of different numbers floating around out there. And I know also that AMDA, the Association of Mini Grid Developers, has developed numbers as well and collected data from their membership to help us understand on a per connection basis what that looks like. So maybe when we come back to the Q&A session and the discussion section, I can offer them an opportunity to provide some input on a per connection basis based on what they're seeing from their membership. But also to your point, really important point that the private sector funding needs to work hand in hand with the public funding, and really syncing those up and making sure that they're complementary is important. So with that, I'm very pleased to hand the mic to Geoff to provide us an overview of the Renewable Energy Performance Platform and offer his perspective and insight on how the market is developing and what that looks like. So Geoff, over to you, and hopefully you can do a screen share more seamlessly than I was able to.
And while Geoff is setting up, just to Alexander, there are a couple of questions that have popped up in the Q&A channel, so maybe you might want to look at those and think of some answers that we can give at the end of Geoff's presentation during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
We can, yep.
Great, thanks. So thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. And it's always good to come immediately after a real developer. Something that surprises me is the extent to which financiers think they have the difficult job, whereas in fact it's the developers who have a difficult job, and finance just needs to fit into that. But I think it's really good that there's Alexander, that there's a developer on this call, and that you got that perspective first. Let me quickly introduce REPP. Before I do, excuse me while this computer is a bit slow, maybe. There we go. I'm from a company called Camco, which is the manager of REPP. I won't bother you with the promo. REPP is a fund, £150 million fund, which is entirely funded by the UK through the ICF, and that is administered through the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. It's not done, this particular funding is done through them rather than DFID. And it was originally conceived by a partnership between the European Investment Bank and UN Environment. It's designed to support the development of the market for distributed energy in sub-Saharan Africa. What does distributed energy mean? It's anything up to 25 megawatts on and off grid. Obviously, off grid is a great source of growth in the sector and is very important. And so actually, if you look at the growth in our deal pipeline, it's very heavily weighted towards off grid. The fund was formed in 2015. And it's been doing a lot of work in mini grids, some of which I'll show you. I'll show you some example deals that we've been working on. Unfortunately, I don't really have time to tell you everything, but I'll do my best. What does REPP do? It provides structured finance for development of projects and programs, developers, and construction. It's a private sector facility, so it works with private sector companies. And it's incredibly flexible. It can do anything from equity to senior debt, including working capital and bridge finance. It can provide and can also work with its partners to arrange de-risking instruments, where in fact we just approved a guarantee for a letter of credit facility for one solar home systems company. Its focus is on developing a sustainable market. There are two parts to that: developing, so it's developmental, and sustainable, meaning commercially sustainable. So the idea there is that grant programs don't stay there forever. The donor organizations tend to, but the programs don't. And so if this sector is going to be long-term sustainable, then it needs to be commercially sustainable. And we spend a lot of time working with and bringing in other sources of funding and other sources of risk mitigation. And so REPP has a broad range of partnerships in that context, from, I wanted to say OPIC, DFC, right through to Sunfunder. Let me think of some others, and foundations, donors, you name it. You can get more information at the website, which is on the screen there. And you probably can't click this. There is a link to the annual report, but it's on the website. What is REPP trying to achieve in mini-grids? Again, help to stimulate the growth of a robust, commercially sustainable sector with affordable, cost-reflective tariffs. And we're trying to do two things with that, right? One is to support the development of strong developers with balance sheets and an ability to attract commercial finance. Quite often when you look at a private sector bank, the interaction, if the company is too small or too recent, or hasn't got a bunch of systems and processes in place, then the bank just can't be bothered. And so part of our view, part of the key to the sustainability of the sector is to have substantial developers who will attract banks rather than have to approach them. The thinking behind that is that firstly, well, that's part of the thinking, right? The other part of the thinking is that we need to get economies of scale in this sector. The cost of service is still quite high. The sector is still at the higher end of the cost scale in many respects. And so we need to get the cost of service down so as to reduce break-even tariffs. The second thing that we're trying to do is to help to develop scalable models for asset level finance. If you look at a lot of mini-grid companies at the moment, there's venture capital style funding, very high risk, money with very high risk tolerance, and therefore a very high return expectation coming in at their parent company level. But then they run into this problem where effectively they're putting in utility style assets. Utility style assets have low stable returns, not high volatile returns. And so they can't end up not being really able to use that VC money in the assets. And so we're working on trying to get an asset level financing going, which allows developers a more scalable growth because they can fund it off balance sheet. It matches the funding with the risk return profile. And also in the financial markets, it develops a financial market for the asset class. A lot of financial market participants are creatures of habit, and they follow the crowd, right? And so if this is something that is well established and everyone is familiar with, it's much easier to get money to channel into it. One thing that REPP in itself is not trying to do is to reduce tariffs below cost reflective levels. In fact, in our objects, one of our objectives is to try and encourage cost reflective tariffs. That gives a competitive return on capital, so it's not profit free, it's profitable but reasonable profit. And having a tariff below a cost reflective level, which seems to be happening in quite a lot of places, that's not something that we can try and achieve. What we can do is, where that's required, is work with donors and grant programs, and we do that.
Geoff, we've got about 5 minutes.
Okay. Couple of transactions. We invested in PowerGen in 2016. We gave them a $350,000-ish development capital loan. That's typically convertible. In 2019, we followed through with $2.5 million of Series B equity. And then we've then followed through into another funding structure, which I'll talk about in a second. We also did a deal with Power Hive 2018. We did a $3 million off-balance sheet senior secured debt into a mini-grid financing vehicle. So the idea is you set up a local company, you put the mini-grids into it, and you put money into that local company. They're doing work in Kenya. And then that's sort of, that progression has followed through with a deal that we did last year with Cross Boundary, which is, they build themselves as a project finance facility for mini-grids. And that was a $5 million off, or is a $5 million off balance sheet senior secured debt into a financing vehicle. And the difference there is that Cross Boundary are the finance arranger and party. In this case, PowerGen are the people originating, building and managing the mini-grids. But there's this separate asset funding vehicle, which is in the diagram there, that the debt and the equity are going into. What are some of our criteria for investees? You can see the map. Anything coloured light or dark blue is within our geographic mandate. Light blue is areas where we have deals active at the moment, although that's a little out of date. So there's some countries have been added since that was done. What are we looking for? A strong foundation to the business, a strong business plan and strong management, some proven execution capability or track record, ability to become commercially sustainable and to grow well. In our objects, we need to be able to see at least potential for a megawatt of installed capacity and rollout, and the ability to adopt and implement REPP policies. And pretty much any mini-grid technology except for fossil fuels is included. There is some allowance for diesel, peaking, etc. In a policy, but we generally try and discourage it. From a policy and regulatory point of view, what are the things that will help the money to flow? One is a clear and enforceable policy environment. And I don't just mean enforceable by the government, I mean enforceable against the government if necessary. A good permitting regime, good tax treatment, or logical tax treatment, clear arrangements for what happens if the grid encroaches, and very clear and logical tariff regulation. Again, just to say our preference is that tariffs are cost reflective. If, as a social policy, the government wants them not to be cost reflective, then that's a separate grant question, which REPP is not really set up to address. And then, of course, the question about COVID-19, which I'll come on to in a second. And really in the context of COVID-19, I think the sector needs as much support as possible. It is effectively an essential service. It's just as essential, at least, as state-owned utilities. because it's providing power to people who would not otherwise get or be able to afford a lot of grid power. Given the prevalence of COVID-19 at the moment, quick slide on that and then I'll finish. And there's some information here that has only just been established, so you heard it first on this channel. So we're seeing quite a significant impact on the sector, delayed or lost revenues. Consumers can't afford to pay, or collection agents can't get out there and collect. An inability to operate, an inability to grow. Companies finding it much more difficult to raise capital, and quite often leading to temporary financial distress. REPP is ready and available to help the sector in that context. So we can and will provide working capital loans, credit guarantees, repayment and interest moratoriums, information, and we'll try and help to ensure that other funders continue to fund as well as REPP, so as to bring companies and businesses that would otherwise be commercially sustainable through the crisis. I spent all morning in a board call and dealing with various things to try and streamline our processes. Our plan is to have investment committee meetings once a week and have streamlined applications with much simpler requirements, so as to deal with this, because we believe the sector is going to need it very quickly. What is the help for? It's for companies and projects that could be expected to be financially sustainable in the absence of COVID. We may impose some conditions. So for example, we may say that you're not allowed to disconnect your customers if they don't pay, because there'll be quite a lot of customers that won't be able to pay for a very good reason. And perhaps if there are consumer loans moratoriums for a period. And we're also working with funding community quite a lot more broadly than that to try and achieve a couple of things. One is to channel money into the sector in light of what's going on. But secondly, is to try and prevent foreclosures where companies are in distress. I guess that's pretty much it on COVID-19. I'm sure you're all sick of hearing about it. I certainly am.
Great. Thank you so much, Geoff. And both your and Alex's presentations spurred a huge number of questions, which we are not going to be able to get through all at once. But because we started a few minutes late, I think we're going to extend our time to 8:40 a.m. my time. So we'll go 10 minutes over if folks are able to join. If not, we understand, and feel free to jump off. But we've got a lot of people on the line and a lot of interest in specific questions. So I'll field a couple of them. One was just a question around whether or not startups can access financing. And for those of you who are interested, one of the purposes of the landscape assessment that we developed was in fact to help startups and private sector companies, as well as public efforts, navigate the universe of funders it's often quite opaque. You don't necessarily know who's interested and or willing to invest in energy access companies. And so that resource was intended to help provide a starting place for understanding kind of who's active and who can access them. So we encourage folks to check that out. There was also several questions around the role of productive use finance and how that interfaces, I think, both Alex, with your kind of core business model and how you're seeing productive use. And obviously your business growing out of lighting, I think, is a great example of how productive use has sort of led into the expansion of services across electrification applications. And Geoff, would love to hear from you on that question as well before we move on to a couple of the other questions. Alex, do you want to go ahead?
Hi, is that for Alexander?
Yeah,
here.
can you guys unmute him? There we go. Thanks.
Is Jess going to talk, or you want me to talk now?
Go ahead. Did you get the question?
Hello? Hello, did you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Okay, so if I got you clearly, you were trying to find out how did we navigate from the lighting to the renewable, and how do we manage productive use of energy? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so our trajectory, as I said earlier, has been, traversing from the lighting space all the way to renewable energy. And we couldn't have done that without very wonderful partnership with very partners who are also on ground, amongst which are Schneider Electric. We build the capacity of our team in terms of renewable energy deployments and training and capacity building. We've, over the years, understand that for you to truly break even in the mini grid business, especially as it has to do with access to energy, to especially unserved and underserved area, there is a consistent need to redefine the business model. As you know, before now, the business model has been primarily come up with a load audits templates, come up with a design of the system size, come up with it, have a financial focus in terms of revenue projections of how much you make over the years. And this is a pay-go system where you install a pre-paid meter for people to actually pay as you go, pay on a pay-as-you-go basis. So over the years, we've discovered that as energy efficiency sets in, revenues, especially with majority of these people in the rural areas who are largely farmers, revenues are seasonal. So there's a consistent need to see how the business model shifts such that will drive the socio-economic condition of the people beyond the existing limit of what it is. And that is why we've aggressively try as much as possible to redefine the business model, try as with new innovations, among which the key maker model.
Alex, we are losing your audio.
What is the key model is, these are things we are working with partners like the GICs to see how at this very early stage we can be able to, apply this level of technology. So what that does, what the key model does is,
Alex, I think your internet connection is dying. So I might hit the pause button and thank you for that though. I think, yep, can you hear us? Oh, we lost him. Geoff, do you want to just say a couple words about productive use? And no worries. Thank you for that answer.
Can you hear me?
About productive use and how REPP is dealing with that.
Hello, Alexia, did you hear me?
Yes.
Alex,
Alex, we lost you.
We kind of lost you for a while. I think productive use is fundamental to the commercial viability of a lot of the off-grid sector, and effectively stimulating demand from their commercial point of view, but also stimulating economic growth in the communities that they're serving. REPP itself is not particularly well set up to fund that, but I do know that there are quite a lot of initiatives now being put together to fund productive use initiatives. There are some challenges in figuring out some of the arrangements for funding those, but there are quite a lot of people working on it.
Great, thanks. And could you just say 2 words? We've had a bunch of questions about de-risking instruments and what that looks like. So can you provide just a couple of lines on just what a de-risking instrument does as an example. It sounds like you guys just did one, so a couple more details on that would be great as well.
Yeah, sure. So there are a whole wide range of de-risking instruments for specific risks. Insurance is a de-risking instrument, whether that be political risk insurance or business interruption or anything like that. Similarly, various guarantees are de-risking instruments. And so the one that we just approved is, I can't give you too much detail because it's not announced yet, but REPP is providing a counter guarantee to a bank so that they can provide letters of credit to a solar home systems company so that they can provide those letters of credit to their suppliers rather than having to pay them up front. Generally, when you're structuring financing in a company, the first thing to do is, in risk terms, is to reduce or remove as many risks as possible, structure them properly, and then apply risk mitigation instruments. And of course, once you've applied risk mitigation, the cost of finance goes down because the credit risk is effectively the risk of the provider of the risk mitigation instrument, which may, for example, be the World Bank, rather than that of the company.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. So we have had lots of good additional conversations. We will share the meeting materials and do our best to provide resources and answers to the variety of questions that came in. Thank you very much both to our panelists. I'm going to hand it over to Alexander Ox, who leads the Energy Working Group for the LEDS-GP, to provide a quick preview of the next two sessions in this webinar series, workshop series that we're developing, and then we'll say a couple words and wrap things up.
Sure, thanks, Alexia. And I'm not going to be long, but I thought it would be a good idea maybe to say that this is part of a mini series of sessions which we brought to the online community, which we had originally planned as an in-person meeting around Climate Week in Africa. I want to say we have a very substantial program for the year. We, as the Energy Working Group, are supporting the Africa LEDS partnership in this Africa Mini Grids community of practice. And I think if you are interested in mini grids, which I suppose most of you are, you should consider joining the Africa LEDS platform and reach out to Josh and his colleagues and sign up. Some of the meetings we do are in-person meetings, are private sessions. So if you are a government or a country team working closely with governments, then you might want to indicate this as well, because we do some meetings really in smaller settings. So quickly about what we are planning to do with our next public session, because that's open to anyone here on this call. On April 30, we have a session which on how to advance sustainable development goals through mini grids, including climate. So there's a clear connection to today's session, but also other sustainable development goals. First of all, we're going to speak about what is this nexus, and then really turn towards providing some concrete advice for how government can promote, can advance sustainable development goals more effectively through mini grids and rural electrification than they are maybe doing this without giving special attention to it. So I'm going to keep it to this and stay tuned. We're going to send out more information, more details about those sessions. Thanks, Alexia and Josh.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alex. And thank you to both Geoff and Alex Chinga for your insight, experience, and contributions to this discussion. It was really excellent to have you both here. And thank you to all of you who joined from around the world under what I know are trying circumstances. We hope you stay healthy, stay home, wash your hands, take good care of each other during this time. And we will look forward to continuing our work together to meet our electrification objectives through the internet and through other virtual means of communications until we have the opportunity to come together again as a group. So have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll look forward to being in touch soon.
Thank you very much, Alexia. Thank you, the rest of the team. It's a pleasure to be here again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Geoff. Bye.
And final thank you to everybody for joining us and for staying this late. Just a very quick reminder that we will have the post-webinar comms that will go out. There will be a recording that will also be shared. But in addition to that, we will also add a couple of details on the AFLP and the AMG-CoP, if anybody might be interested in getting in touch with us in terms of joining and furthering the conversations we've had here. Thank you very much, and have a lovely evening. We look forward to seeing you registered for our next sessions coming up on the 30th of April and on the 7th of May. Thank you.